I thought we'd start like quite appropriately because Adam has written a book about lists by getting him to read one of his favorite lists to give us a bit of a sense of what his work is like. So did you want to start with your list, Adam?
Yes, I'd love to. So this one works quite well, I think, for reading aloud because it's a list of the most satisfying words to say aloud. 8, discombobulation. 7, higgledy-piggledy. 6, Zamboni. 5, nincompoop. 4, mellifluous. 3, flump. 2, kerfuffle. 1, I told you so.
I mean, I guess that gets me to one of my first questions, which is how do you rank things like that? Because you do put them in an order. It's like when you've got a list of words, how do you do that?
So until I started on Twitter a couple of years ago, all of my lists were ranked in terms of preference. So in that list of 8 to 1, the 8 entry would be my 8th favorite and sort of so on. But it works a bit differently now on Twitter and in the book, because I guess I'm writing these lists for other people to read rather than just myself. So I probably construct them a bit more like how you'd make a playlist, where you want to start with something really, really strong, or have the first couple to really pull people in. Then sort of another good one in the middle, so it doesn't sort of lag too much, and then end with something strong or something a little bit different that sort of has a bit of a twist on it. So that was quite a change to me, actually, because my whole thing with listing, which I've had my whole life, is always everything must be ordered, and this is my favorite, this is my second favorite, this is my third favorite. So it's sort of changed quite a bit these last few years now that I sort of post these lists on Twitter and on book, and that sort of I almost see it more as I don't want to say a sort of an art form, but I sort of treat it more in the way if I was sort of doing a poem or a short story, that okay, what order works and how does it sort of flow. So yeah, that's how I do them these days.
So what's your process now when it comes to making a new list? Because there is such a broad cross section, both on your Twitter and in your book, because you do wordplay, you do actual facts, you just go, I can't count them all because there's just so many different types. So what's your process? So
it's all the ones in the book have probably all come from different time periods. So I have a very obsessive sort of brain. I'm terrible at multitasking, but I'll get into one thing and then I'll just have to know everything about it. So you mentioned the trivia and the facts. I'll have an obsession with that for 6 months, where I'll just read every trivia and fact book that I can find, or I'll get into sort of old language and read lots of dictionaries of Victorian slang or 16th century slang. The most recent one in the last 6 months, well, probably more like a year or so now, there's been idioms from all around the world. So again, I'll read lots of foreign dictionaries, lots of sort of idioms from different countries. And I'll write them all every time I find an interesting thing. So if I'm reading the trivia books, and I'll find out, I don't know, there was a firefighter called Les McBurney, let's say. So then I'll think, okay, so it was just sort of also known as nominative determinism, where sort of people have a name and then they end up doing an occupation that very much sort of fits that. So then I'll go away and sort of spend a few days researching, trying to find others. There's a vasectomy specialist called Dick Chop. There's a sort of lawyer in America called Sue Yu. All those kind of things. So and I'll find dozens and dozens of those, and then try and sort of narrow it down. And normally, again, in the past, before sort of Twitter, everything would have to be a top 10. Or maybe a top 5, but now that's very much sort of decided by the character limits on the 280 character limits on sort of Twitter. So it's really just how many I can fit in. So sometimes it'll be a top 6, sometimes it'll be a top 7, sometimes it'll be a top 8, which was again a challenge for me, because I sort of have very set ideas, and sort of especially around sort of numbers and sort of a little bit sort of OCD that way. So to do a sort of top 7 just wasn't something that was on my radar until Twitter sort of a few years ago, which I've now sort of embraced. I mentioned on my Twitter profile that top fours are an absolute abomination, which I still stick to, and I never do a top four. But yeah, apart from that, it could be, like I said, top 6, top 7, top 8. So it'll be dictated by that for Twitter. But I'm really fortunate on Twitter that I sort of have all these great followers from all around the world that are experts in languages and trivia and all sorts of things. So they'll contribute things in the comments, and sometimes some of those will find their way into the book where I don't have the character limit, so I can make the list a little bit longer, and I'll add some of those contributions. So the sort of books become quite collaborative in a way, which is sort of why several times throughout I sort of thank the people on Twitter for all the things that they've added.
I remember reading at one point in the book that in some of the obscure phrases lists that you had, you wanted to check that if it was definitely something that someone in that country would say. So you'd check with 2 native speakers. So, I mean, that level of research is quite a lot. The lists are short, but it sounds like you do a lot of reading, and each one represents like a big body of work.
So with that one, so usually quite often I might find well, I'm sort of reading different books about international idioms. Say I might sort of read somewhere, I don't know, that the equivalent of it's raining cats and dogs in Norway is it's raining female trolls, or in Wales it's raining old ladies and sticks. So then I'll go away and have several dozens of these books of international idioms, read them all, see if I can find others. I also have a sort of Word file, which is about 500 or 600 pages, where I just collect all the different phrases that I see. So I'll go through again and sort of try and find similar ones and bring them in. But then also on Twitter, I have lists of speakers from all over the world. So I have sort of file with a dozen Arabic speakers, Welsh speakers, Danish speakers, and so on. So I might then email 20 of those from all different languages and say, look, in your country, how do you say it's raining cats and dogs? I also have with those ones, same as with English, with most expressions, there's multiple different versions. So I'll usually, I'm quite a hipster at heart, so I always favour the ones that most people haven't heard of, even from that country itself. It might be a regional one, or it might be an old one that only grandparents know. And so often when I post those on sort of Twitter, people say, "Oh well, I've not heard this, so it doesn't exist." And I also say, "Oh, actually, it was from 100 years ago, or it's just from this region." So yeah, on the one hand, I like the obscure ones, but also I wouldn't put one in that I just completely made up, unless I've just completely made it up as a joke.
Kind of remarkable that you can draw upon all of these from your mind. You mentioned you had a 500-page document, but it does seem like there are a lot of them just stored in your memory that you can pull out.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because I think that's sort of part of the appeal for with this for me. In that, I mean, I have always had quite a good memory. The last about 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with something called fibromyalgia, which sort of gives you sort of something called a brain fog, and my memory is nowhere near as good as it used to be. And lists are actually really useful for that now. So I might read sort of some facts or sort of information about so language, a phrase, or a word that I'd probably forget, but by the process of putting them in the sort of list, it sort of helps bring it back to me. So yeah, I'd say that's one of the many things I love about this. Yeah, it just helps me remember.
Have you had any controversial lists for any reason?
In the UK, the biscuit list, which I remember from when I lived in Australia, just it isn't so much of a thing there. I mean, who cares when you're in Australia? But yeah, here in England especially, it's sort of this, people get really passionate about how dare you say a hobnob is better than a chocolate bourbon or whatnot. But the main controversy was that for the Jaffa cake in my list of biscuits, so here there's sort of the big, it's almost bigger than Brexit. So there is a Jaffa cake, a cake, or is it a biscuit? It's been going on for about 10 years. There was even a court case by McVitie's who make Jaffa cakes. They went to court to have it legally classified as a cake because there's less VAT, so they pay less tax on a silicate cake. But lots of people stick to that. They'll say, well, there was a court case and it was decided that it was a cake. So of course it's a cake. Also, it's in the name. It's called a Jaffa cake. So yeah, I had long debates with sort of people, because I mean, there's lots of things called a cake that are not really a proper cake that you'd have for dessert. A urinal cake, a potato cake. Just because it's got cake in the name, it doesn't sort of necessarily mean it. The same with the fact that it was passed into law that it was the cake. So actually, as a result of this weird controversy about Jaffa cakes, I ended up writing quite a few more lists that ended up in the book. So I have a list of ridiculous laws. Mostly to make the point that Jaffa cake being a cake isn't the only ridiculous thing out there. I have a list of misnomers, which is sort of things that are sort of misleadingly named, whether it's a seahorse not being a horse, baby food doesn't have babies in it, and sort of not Lone Ranger, always with the sidekick, never-ending story actually ends. Yeah, so that was probably the most controversial one, and the closest I guess I got to being cancelled.